Okay, welcome back to First Person Radio. So earlier we built one of these 49:1 impedance transformers that are great for end-fed half-wave HF radios. So now we're going to be making our actual antenna, our radiating element. So the formula that we use is 468 divided by the frequency in megahertz is going to be the length of your antenna in feet for a half wave. That applies to dipoles or half waves. In a dipole, you'd feed it in the middle, so each leg of it would be 234 divided by frequency. That'd be the length in feet. But we're doing an end fed, which is like a dipole fed from one very end of it. So that's just the length of wire we use. This is approximate. It's going to overestimate slightly. And you kind of want it to be overestimated slightly because you can cut wire off to bring your resonant frequency up, but adding wire on is more difficult and leaves you with like splices and solder on your antenna somewhere. That's just kind of a weak point. It's better to have one solid wire. So cut a little bit long and then trim to exact resonance, which is what we're going to be doing today. So the highest frequency I'm going to tune this for is going to be for 40 meters, which is at about 7.2 megahertz. So 468 divided by 7.2 gives me 65. So my first antenna element is going to be about 65 feet long. This, because it's an end-fed half wave, it'll also be resonant on the 20 meter band. So I should be able to get both 40 and 20 with that first radiating element. So let's, I've got the antenna lengths pre-cut and soldered here. And I've only got one end of it soldered, the other end is just a bare wire. Once we get the frequency we want, I am going to crimp and solder that end of the wire and make a more permanent connection. Now let me grab my little, I think I forgot to bring scissors, but I believe I have scissors on this little multi-tool here. That should, yeah, there we go. I should be able to use those scissors to strip the wire. It's, not ideal, but it'll work. So step one is going to be to get my throw line put together. So for a throw line, I'm using just fishing line. This is 50 pound. This is the biggest or the highest weight rating they had in the Walmart when I bought it. Should be plenty. And then I use these bank weights or channel weights. I like 8 ounce. So we're gonna get our throw line set up. So the knot I use for this is real simple because I'm not much of a Boy Scout. You just create a loop there. Well, you thread the line through, have a good bit of distance there, and then wind it maybe 15 or 20 times. If I can remember how to do this. And then you take this end, go through the opening back here, and then go back through the loop you just made here, and then pull it tight. Oh, I did that wrong. Hang on. I got that all tangled. Let me try that again. It's live. Well, recorded live. In front of a live studio audience, you know how that goes. But I really do these pretty much in one take, and if I screw it up, I try and just kind of power through. Because when you're in the field, you're going to screw things up too. And you might have to just kind of figure something out in the moment, which is part of the fun of ham radio, if you ask me. All right. So a bunch of turns. Sorry, I'm going to focus less on the camera angle and more about getting this knot done. Goes back through the opening, and then through here. And now the trick is, all of these are going to kind of, there we go. Got to kind of hold the end with my teeth to get it to cinch down nice and tight. So that, there we go. That looks good. Yeah, so that should hold it. You really don't want this coming loose. because you'll end up flinging an 8-ounce bank weight into somebody's window or car or head or dog or something. So, all right. I have a tool here. I don't have to chew this with my teeth. I can just cut it with my scissors. Wonderful. All right. So one end of this is this bank weight. It's nice and taut. And then this is my improvised wire winder made out of PVC pipe. And I can just wind it in a figure 8. Again, figure 8s don't kink because it's half a turn one way and half a turn the other. But this wire is wound on a reel, so it will kind of want to kink a little bit. But after a couple times, all the twist will be worked out of the line and it won't be a problem anymore. So I just wind a decent amount of this. Doesn't have to be a ton. And then I'll cut it. Just cutting it there. And then for the other side of it, you can use a carabiner. The smallest thing I've found that slips through the tree branches easier is these little quick links. This one's just 1/8 inch. They're kind of expensive for what they are, like $4 for this stupid thing. I bought a 2-pack of them at Walmart for like $2 once upon a time, but for some reason, depending on where you get them, they seem to be kind of expensive at the hardware store. All right, so same story here. Tie a quick knot. I could have done this beforehand, but I kind of wanted to demonstrate this fishing line knot and just how my throw line is set up. It's real basic. The only thing that's a little hard to find is those 8-ounce bank weights. I believe they are more common for saltwater fishing than freshwater fishing, but I am not a fisherman, as you can tell from my extremely poor knot skills. Oh, hold on, just a second. Okay, there we go. I also don't really like fish, but it doesn't matter. All right, so that should be pretty tight. Cut the end of that wire, make sure I tuck it in my little box here so I don't leave little bits of plastic all over the ground, leave no trace, all that fun stuff. All right, so for my wire, I've also used white shrink tubing to kind of mark these. The one with the long is my ground wire. The length of the ground wire doesn't really matter, just a few meters. You don't want it too long. It's also a slightly different color than the rest of the wire, which is kind of nice. So that's the first one. I'm going to put that out first. That goes in the opposite direction as my antenna. So where's the other end of that? Okay. All right. So I just unblind it and throw it off into the bushes over here. All right. And the ground portion of my antenna is this terminal. This goes to my radio. My radio is sitting on the ground, so I put the ground on that side, just as a way for me to remember which one is ground. You can also literally see the winding of the transformer, so if you remember your wiring diagram, then you can just kind of look at it and kind of go, oh yeah, that's the ground connection. So we will put my ring terminal over the 1/4-20 there, and then just tighten my little wing nut like that. Perfect. So that's a good electrical connection, and then my ground wire just kind of goes off into the bushes. And now we'll get my positive end up in the air. So my positive end, I've marked these with, so this one is number 1, this one is number 2, this one is number 3. So my first one is going to be for 7.2 megahertz. That's number 1. It's about 65 feet long, 468 divided by 7.2. So that's this guy. Alright, so let's get it in the air. I'm going to take my quick link. Oh snap, hold on. I lost my Velcro. I'll go grab it. Quick link just goes through the ring terminal there. And I don't want to lose my double-sided Velcro. That's how I keep my wires from coming loose in the bag. Alright, so step one, unwind all of your throw line. So I just unwind it like so. It's wound in a figure eight so you can just go back and forth. Alright, so throw line is unwound. Now I'm going to unwind my antenna wire, or most of it at least. And this is going to be a little untidy because all the other antenna wires are not yet attached together. They'll all be attached together in one big long line at the end, but for now it works. I'm also unwinding these in like slightly different directions just so I don't end up stepping on the wire as I throw it, and I don't end up getting it looped around my legs or anything. And again, as I said in my kind of overview video, unwind more line than you think you need, because if it runs out of slack and whips back around, it'll get wrapped around a tree branch. Alright, so here's my weight. I'm going to get it up in that tree up there. I'm going to get it around one of the higher branches, but it doesn't really matter that much. So I'll just kind of swing it around and just kind of whip it up there. Oops. If it doesn't catch the rest of the line. There we go. All right. There. All right, so there's the weight coming down. I don't know if you can see it, but that should work fine for us. All right. So this is about 65 feet, maybe a little bit longer. And I need to get this a little bit lower. Hang on. So to lower your line, you just kind of send like a wave up it, and it'll give it a little bit of slack. It'll drop. Oh, right there. Dropped right down to the ground. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to strip this end of this wire and connect it to my positive terminal, and then we'll see where we're resonant. So the way we're going to do this is measuring SWR, standing wave ratio. I've got a great idea. To stop my antenna tuner from getting pulled into the air by my antenna, I'm going to use my double-sided Velcro to attach it to the picnic table. Oh, there. Man, if I didn't know any better, I'd say it was a genius. Alright. So this is a little more tight than I'd like. I'm kind of out of line, but we should be able to make it work. So I'm just gonna cut the insulation, peel the wire off. So, standing wave ratio is a measure of how well matched your antenna is to the frequency you're trying to transmit on. The lower, the better. A perfect standing wave ratio is 1:1, and then as it gets worse, that number gets higher. So like a 2:1 is kind of okay, a 3:1 is pretty bad, a 4:1 is not usable, and then all the way up to like 10:1 or infinite to 1. Past about like 7 or 8:1, it gets kind of like, it's just really bad. So this one, there we go. And you don't actually have to know the exact number of your standing wave ratio either. You just need to know if it's high or low. So, get my antenna plugged into my radio. And again, we're going to do 7.2 megahertz. And we're going to see that my standing wave ratio is going to be fairly loud. Also, depending on my mode here, we're going to start picking up signals.
Well, it just amazes me, Sam. You know, I've got these two.
So, tune to a frequency with no activity, and you're required to transmit your call sign to identify yourself before you start transmitting signal. I don't hear anything on 7.2 right now, and that's right where I wanted to tune. So I'm just going to call my call sign real quick. My SWR will be poor, but that's fine. Okay, my SWR was actually really good there. That's kind of surprising. Let me check SWR meter. Wow. This might actually be resonant. I didn't see any SWR. Let me see what my power output is. That's full power output. That's kind of wild. I might have it dead on. I thought it was going to be long. Should be long. So let me test the upper side of the band. About 7.3. I can't get to 7.3. Well, I can, but I want to stay a little bit away from the band edges. But I'm going to see 2.97. Okay, good power. Low SWR, wow, okay. And then 7.125. Huh. Well, 130. No SWR. Excellent power. Wow. Alright, well that's working great. I might not have to trim that at all. So this is the low-tech and simple way to do it, by just using the SWR meter built into your radio, or if your radio doesn't have one, using an external SWR meter. The better way to do it, that's more precise, that I'm going to be using for the rest of this, is to use an antenna analyzer, or this guy, the Nano VNA. VNA is Vector Network Analyzer. It does a whole lot more than just antenna SWR, but that's what I'm going to be using it for today. And honestly, I don't understand the rest of it well enough to really tell you what else it does. It's pretty technical stuff, to be honest with you. So I'm just going to plug this guy in and see where exactly we're resonant. And this will be able to measure the SWR on a bunch of different frequencies at once, so we can see what other bands we're resonant on as well. And they're about $40. Or no, I think there was like $60. They're handy to have. And honestly, if these had come out when I first started getting into radio, I would have bought one of these. But instead I went with other options that were not as handy. Alright, so let me just get some adapters going here. Plug this guy in. And we'll see, because this will let us see both 20 meter band and 40 meter band at the same time. By the way, if you're tuning up your antenna and you have a radio that can push a lot of power, if you can push 100 watts, it's polite to turn down your power output so you're not blasting everybody with really loud whistles when you're tuning your antenna. Alright, so that is a mess of data on the screen. Let me get rid of most of my traces here. I only want one trace, trace 1, and then I want it to be SWR. Oh, sorry, you can't see my screen. So I'm going to have SWR. So I went to marker. Hold on, no, I went to display trace, and I turned off all these other traces. Just left trace 0. And then I went to format, SWR, And now somewhere in here, I should have a frequency. Stimulus, I think is where that is. Start. We're going to say 3 megahertz. Okay. Stop. The highest frequency I want to worry about is 15 megahertz. All right, so look at that. We have 2 little dips. The first dip, very low at 14.16. And then the second dip, also very low, 7.08. All right, so my lowest point is at 7.08 megahertz. That's a little bit lower than I want it. I want it to come up in frequency. So I'm going to trim my antenna a little bit shorter. Longer antenna, lower frequency. Shorter antenna, higher frequency. And the 20 meter band up here is also, well, it's pretty dang close to where I want it. 7.16 is a little bit on the low side. So I'm going to trim a little bit and see where that gets us. So we were at 7.08 and 14.16. Notice how one is exactly double of the other. So I'm just going to cut off, I don't know, 6 inches or so. Hope that's not too much. I can't uncut the wire. So as a rule, start with a small adjustment and then make a large one. Maybe a good rule of thumb is, if you think you need to take off a foot, take off 6 inches. And if you moved exactly half of the distance you wanted to, then go ahead and do it again. Maybe make half the adjustment you expect to. So, all right, we're gonna tighten this down again. Whew, the wind is getting in the way here. I'm gonna hold this wire a little so it doesn't come out. Wow. Wind has been really bad to me today. You'll see as I touch it, it moves my resonant frequency, so I don't really want to do that. All right, so now I'm at 14.28 on the upper, and then 7.08 is still the lower, but it did move a little bit. I just have a fairly small, every click is, you know, a decent chunk, 7.08 to 7.20. All right, so I can still remove a little bit more. Let's see here. 14.28. And 40 meter band is the one that I'm really most concerned about. 20 meter band is really just for fun. So I'll cut another 6 inches off or so. There we go, strip the wire. All right, now where are we at? So we're at a high end of 20 meters, 14.4-ish. And then on 40 meters, we're right at 14.2 or 7.2. So that's perfect. That's where I want to be. All right, so I'm gonna loosen this wire, and I'm going to get my wire out of the tree before I solder it. So I'm going to kind of go off screen real quick while I take my antenna down. It's not going to give you any extra educational value. Be right back. All right, I got my antenna out of the tree so it's not fighting me anymore. So this was the length that I wanted to solder it at, and I've got a couple components here. First one is heat shrink tubing. So just bear with me, you'll see how it all fits together. I'm going to cut one length of it, maybe 3/4 of an inch. Then thread that over the wire. It's important to do this before you crimp a connector on, because then you can't fit it. Then we have another connector that's a little bit shorter, maybe 1/2 inch or so. And then thread that over. So I got those on the wire. Now I'm going to crimp my connector. This is a 3/8 inch ring terminal, and these were for 18 to 22 gauge wire. This is 24 gauge. Or it might be 22, so it's a little on the small side. So it's not ideal, but it still works. So I'm gonna fold that wire in half to give myself a little bit extra thickness of wire in this crimp. And then I'm just gonna insert it and then crimp it so that I got a little bit of wire on either side. I crimp it with a nice big pair of pliers. You could probably just bang them between a couple rocks if you're having to improvise something in the field. But I've got a pair of pliers. I'm going to use a pair of pliers. So I crimp it, make sure it's nice and secure. Now I'm going to solder it to make it extra secure. Because when I first started, so this is my little butane soldering iron. When I first started, I had a problem all the time where these connectors would break. That wire would pull out of the ring terminal, or they would bend and weaken and then just snap. But I've got a system now that I think does a pretty dang good job of strengthening these connections. So I'm going to heat this guy up until I can melt a little bit of solder. Takes a little bit to do, a few seconds. But I'll talk about the other end of these connections while we're at it. So the connector is a ring terminal that has been crimped and then soldered. And then I have 2 layers of shrink wrap. You can see where the first layer ends, and now I've only got the one. So now when this bends, it's this nice smooth arc instead of a sharp corner. And what that does is that stops the end of the wire from getting work hardened and stress hardened right at that connection, which is what causes it to break. Your headphones have this too, like your 3.5 mil headphones, that little boot on the end, that's what it's supposed to do. On the cheap ones it doesn't work well, which is why your headphones always die, but this has proved to be extremely durable for me. I've only broken a handful of these, and I used to break them like every 3rd or 4th outing. Alright, I can melt a little solder. So I'm just going to hold it on the little crimp connector and feed a little bit of solder in. This wind is not helping. And I'll know it's gotten hot enough when I can just touch the solder to the wire and it melts directly. Also, I'm using a piece of cardboard as a little as a support for the bottom of it. I found that cardboard does really well at standing up to the heat of soldering, temporarily at least. Wow, this is really not wanting to melt. I think it's the wind is killing me here. You really want to solder as quickly as you can so that the heat doesn't get conducted all the way down. Alright, so
It doesn't go through.
got solder on both ends of this. It's nice and hot. That'll be good. So I'm going to turn this off and let this solder cool completely. Be right back. Alright, so that solder joint is cooled. It only took a few seconds, but we had some folks walking by chatting and I didn't want any background noise. So, now I take the length of shrink tubing, slide it over that about halfway over the connection, and then I start up my soldering iron again. And the butane ones have a little exhaust vent that you can use like a little heat gun to shrink your heat shrink tubing. Although it works a lot better when you're inside and the wind isn't blowing all the heat away. There, alright. So the heat shrink is there. I'm going to use my pliers to kind of clamp it a little bit, just kind of squeeze it tight. Probably don't need to do that, but I do. And now I take my second layer and slide it over the first. And the reason this one is longer is so that I have 3 different layers. I have 3 different layers of stiffness going on here. So let me finish shrinking this one down, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. And I shrink on all sides of it. Yeah, so I have three layers here. The first one is where it's actually crimped under the metal. That's extremely stiff. That's not going to bend at all. And then I have this double heat shrink layer that's fairly stiff. And then I have this single heat shrink layer that's really flexible. So that gives me a nice smooth arc. Because otherwise you end up with a kink right where it goes from extremely stiff to not stiff at all. So this really helps. Alright, so that's my connection. And now to connect it to the next layer, so this is wire number 2, I use these nylon nuts and bolts that are 3/8 inch They weigh practically nothing, they're electrically insulating, and they're very low profile, so they slide through the tree branches. So I just connect them like this. And then I just tighten these by hand, and that's a good enough electrical connection for my antenna. So my next length of wire, my first one was resonant for 7.2 megahertz. Now my next band I want is 60 meters, which is 5.35 megahertz is the center frequency roughly. So that gives me 87.5 feet of wire. But I've already got 65, right, for my 40 meter band, so now I just need to add 22.5. So this length of wire, number 2, is about 22.5 feet. So I'm going to go pause and get that in the air the same way, and we'll measure for resonance. Alright, so I got the antenna back up in the tree, and this is my 40 meter resonant hooked up to my second length of wire. It's about 87.5 feet, and it should be resonant right around a little bit lower than 5.35. Oh, dang it. I forgot. Every time I turn this thing off, it resets the screen. Alright, so I'm going to go to display, trace, turn off all of my traces except for trace 1. Go to format, SWR, back, and now I go to stimulus and set my start at my low frequency, 3 megahertz, and then I set my stop at my 15 megahertz, which is above the highest frequency I care about. Alright, so now I move my marker, see where I'm resonant. First one is at 10.92. I think that's pretty close to the 30 meter band, but I never used the 30 meter band, so I couldn't tell you. And then my lowest band is at 5.52 or 5.4. Oh, that's kind of unfortunate. That's a little higher than I wanted to be. It's not too bad though. And I believe the lowest frequency, I'm still at like 1.7 SWR, because the 60 meter band, I forget the exact frequencies. Let me actually, I got them programmed in my radio. So let me go to memory mode, VM, and then I have, oh, great. I have them programmed with the name 60 meter 01, 2, 3, 4, and 5, not the frequency. And to be honest with you, it's been a while since I've fiddled with the menus on my Yaesu, so I don't remember how to get the frequency out of that. Well, that was a dead end. So yeah, it's a little on the high end, but if I recall correctly, it was something like 5.3 to 5.4, and I'm resonant across that entire band at below 2.0 SWR. So that's pretty good. I'm actually just going to solder this one right here, just like I did with the other one, and then we will look at the 80 meter. And the 80 meter, I think there's something interesting I wanted to show you about that one. Okay, so scene change. I got my 80 meter element in the air. The wind picked up, started blowing everything around. It looked like I cut the element too short. I was able to improvise and use my ground wire to extend my radiating element and trim it and get everything running. But I felt like it was a lot of time that I spent and not a lot of educational value. So went home, recut the 80 meter element a little bit extra long this time, and got to a different location with a different setup and very little to no wind today. So lesson learned for me is I want to keep maybe an extra 10 or 15 feet, probably more like 10 feet, of wire coiled up in my bag somewhere that I can pull out to splice in if I end up with a situation where my antenna is a little bit too short, based on whatever setup I have, or if I break a wire or lose a small section of it. I can use my ground wire, but then I don't have a ground wire, and that decreases the performance of your antenna. So I got my first two elements that I already trimmed for 40, 20, and 60 meters. And now I've got my 80 meter element up, and I am resonant at 3.6. I'd like to be more resonant at around 3.7. You'll notice that I am also resonant throughout the 40 meter band, which is great, and also throughout the 20 meter band. Although I'm a little bit well, I'm okay. I'm a little bit high on the 20 meter band, but that's fine. So I'm going to take maybe a couple feet, because this is a low frequency. So a relatively large difference in the length of my wire is going to make a relatively small difference in the resonance and where it's resonant. If this was the 20 meter band, I'd be cutting off like 2 or 3 inches at a time. And as a rule, if you're trying to use by the numbers, what you should do is you should say, I calculate that I should take off 2 feet. Well, take off 1 foot, see if you're halfway there. And then if you are, then you cut off the other foot. Measure twice, cut once, that kind of thing. All right, so let's see what that got us. A couple feet trimmed off, and now it looks like I am 3.72 to 3.6, so I'm at like maybe 3.65-ish. I want to make my antenna such that it's still good at about 4 megahertz, the upper end of the band. Right, and right now I'm at a 3.6 SWR. And the lower end of the band is 3.5, and I'm just a little lower than I'd like to be. So I'll take maybe another foot, maybe half as much of an adjustment as last time. And the 80 meter band is pretty broad. It's quite a lot of range. So what I might have to do is I might have to have my antenna cut for the upper section of 80 meters and then have just a little extender wire, just a few feet, to bring me in resonance at the lower end. So if I'm running like Morse code or digital, I'll have that little extra length in there. And if I'm just running voice, I'll leave that extra end off. Maybe I'll attach it to my ground. Okay. So now I'm almost exactly at 3.7. And at 3.9, I'm at about 3 to 1 SWR, which is not super great. And then 3.6, I believe, is the lower end of voice. I'm still a little bit low from where I want to be. So let's look at where I'm at on the 40 meter band. See, at 7.2, I'm starting to climb up. 7.0, I'm a little bit high, but this still looks pretty good for 40. On the 20 meter band, I'm well high of where I want to be. Right, so the upper end of the 20 meter band is right around between there and there. So I'm a little high, but that's fine. This is my 80 meter element. What I'm trying to demonstrate there is that you probably can't get 80, 40, and 20 all resonant on the antenna at the same time unless you have a lossy transformer, because the more loss you have, the better your SWR is, because all of that reflected signal gets eaten up as well. So just because your SWR is good doesn't mean your antenna performs well, but it does mean your radio is going to be happy with you and isn't going to break. So maybe that's all you need sometimes. All right, so now I'm significantly high on the 40 meter band. And on the 80 meter band, I'm resonant about 3.72. And at the upper end, I'm at 3 to 1 SWR. I don't think I'm going to get a whole lot better than that. I think that is about as good as I'm likely to get. Still, I mean, it's roughly centered in the 80 meter band. So on the lower portion of voice, I'm great. On the upper portion of voice, I'm a little bit off. You know what? I said I was going to get it better at the upper portion of voice, and I am. Okay. I'm definitely going to have a 2-segment 80 meter band antenna. So this is the process. You just trim and check, and trim and check, and trim and check. You can get fancy with it and do the math if you'd like and say, well, I calculated that it should be this long, and I'm actually off on the frequency I thought by 5%. So if I cut it by 5% shorter, and try and do that, but it's just fine to just trim and check. It gets the job done. Yeah, okay, so now I'm at 2.7 on the upper portion. I'll just cut a little bit more off, and this should be enough. I'm also doing this on a weekday at the end of the day, and I'm about to run out of daylight. I'm doing this kneeling on the grass, so it's not super comfortable either. Okay. 2.5 at the upper end of the band. 2.3. Yeah, that's about perfect. And 40-meter band, as expected. Way high, but that's fine. All right, so now I'm going to crimp and solder this wire as my last radiating element. So long length, short length, long length first, short length second, get my ring terminal on there. Crimp it. Solder it. This probably doesn't provide a whole lot of educational value either, but I like kind of proving that you can do it quick, fast, and in a hurry in very primitive conditions. Although, obviously you can't go too fast or you get what happened last time. Oh man, old man knees. Oh, the other fun thing is the other day when I was improvising, I literally held this wire between my teeth and held a lighter, one of the little butane lighters, underneath the ring terminal and touched solder to it with my hand. So I had the wire between my teeth, a lighter in one hand and solder in the other, and soldered it not with the butane torch, but with a butane lighter. So you can do that in an emergency. So that's the other thing I'm going to keep in my bag, is I'm going to keep just a little length of solder, because I already have a little butane lighter. I'm going to keep a little length of solder in there as well, and then I can improvise that kind of a soldering of a ring terminal. All right, I think we're about hot enough. Oh, look at that. Like a charm. Oh, sorry, you missed it. Snooze, you lose, YouTube. Don't you love how I blame you when I screw up? Ask my girlfriend how that works. All right, there we go. Nice and soldered. Put the cover back on so I don't melt my plastic bag, although I might melt the plastic cover, we'll see. Lighter. I'm kidding, by the way. I'm actually very nice to my girlfriend. Okay, there we go. Or I try to be, at least. So, shrink wrap. Number 1. Shrink wrap number 2. There we go. Antenna's done. So now to pack it up. So a trick with packing it up is pack up the stuff that you're going to most use at the end of your reel. So, oh boy, that hurts. Oh. I'm going to disconnect my weight because dragging that weight through the tree has the potential to get it lost. So step 1 is to disconnect my weight. Now, no matter what frequency I'm using this on, I'm going to use that first length of wire, the one that's 40 and 20. So that goes on last. And then the wire that I'm going to use least often is the 80 meter, because I'm only using that when I'm on the 80 meter band. So I'm going to wind that up first. So then I just reel out to the 40, then to 60 and 80 if I need them. So I could go a long time without ever reeling out the 80 meter band. If I don't operate on 80, it'll just stay there. All right, so now I can just start winding my figure 8s. I also like to have 2 wire winders, one for my throw line and one for my antenna and ground, but it's not strictly necessary, and it'd be more compact if I only had one. I just have to juggle things a little bit more. Because I also like to wind up my throw line on the other end of my antenna so I can use it to kind of stake out the other end. All right, so that's the 80 meter resonator. I'm going to loosen this a little because it's around that bend. I'll have to tighten it up when I actually use it if I go to 80, because I need to have a good electrical connection, but I can loosen it so that that doesn't mess up. Okay, so that was my 60 meter resonator there, number 2, and then this is my 40 meter resonator, well, 40 and 20. I would usually orient these so that the part of it that I marked with those little stripes is at the end that I'm spooling out first, so I can see which one it is. So on the 60 it is, but the 80 one was backwards. Oh no, never mind. They're all right. So the end that I'm holding that I first unwind has marked on it what line number it is. They should always be in order, so I shouldn't really have to know, but in case something weird happens. All right, so that's resonating element 1. And then I will also always be using my ground wire, and I'll probably spool my ground wire out before I get my element in the air. Or before I get my throw line in the air, I'll just spool my ground wire out first thing. So that goes on the very end. And this one's just, kind of hold it on the end there. I also have the remnants of my other 80 meter band ground just sitting there. I'm just going to throw that away. All right, so that's it. And then elastic it up. And now I'll go wind up the rest of my throw line and pack up. So we built a 49-to-1 antenna transformer. We built our little wire winders out of PVC pipe. I mean, I could give you guys a video on these, but they're so caveman simple. I think you can figure it out. PVC pipe, little section of PVC, PVC, and then these little T-junctions. We got our throw line. We cut our resonating elements to the theoretical length we expected them to be, plus a little extra, just in case the calculations were off or our setup was a little different. Then we took it out to the field. We tested the SWR, saw that it wasn't perfect because we wanted it to be long, and then we trimmed it until it was where we wanted it. And that, my friends, is start to finish how to make your first HF radio antenna that is extremely portable, and you can set it up anywhere you have a tree or anything that you can throw a line over that isn't metal. Metal stuff will mess with your antenna, but if it's like a wooden or plastic something that you can fling an antenna over, you can set it up there or dangle it out the edge of a hotel room window. I've done that before. Having your ground wire up in the hotel doesn't do you any favors, but it works. So yeah, you can use it almost anywhere. And we also did most of the antenna soldering in the field with kit that we can take with us in the field. So if we need to modify it, like say the end of the world happened and I didn't want to use the ham radio bands anymore, and I wanted to operate on, I don't know, 6.2 megahertz or something, some frequency I've never operated at before. I could measure the length of my antenna, calculate where I would need to cut it, and it should be pretty accurate because if I know my resonant frequency at X length, I can kind of do the fraction and figure out what the other one is. And then I could solder connectors in and operate at whatever frequency I wanted. And this end-fed half-wave antenna transformer doesn't really care as long as it's in the HF spectrum and you have the right length resonator. So that's the other advantage of these, is that they're pretty easy to get going on a different frequency. You just have to cut the right length of wire. All right, well, I hope that was educational. Feel free to drop something in the comments if you have any questions. But the next stuff I'm going to cover is I'm going to talk a little bit about power and how to calculate how long your battery is going to last, how much power your radio is drawing, how much of a battery you need, and then maybe I'll do a video on solar charging and that kind of thing. Both charging of the batteries and also figuring out how big of a solar system you would want to have for a given radio and transmitting duty cycle. All right, see you next time.